The early morning sunlight streamed through the high windows of Courtroom 7, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. Samira Williams stood with perfect posture, her McLaren racing team jacket a splash of vibrant color against the muted tones of the justice system. Her racing helmet, adorned with intricate designs representing her journey, sat quietly on the defendant's table. Judge Richard Henderson peered down from his bench, his reading glasses perched low on his nose as he reviewed the citation before him. His eyes narrowed at the words excessive speed and reckless endangerment printed in stark black letters against the white paper. The time was 8:45 a.m., and this was supposed to be another routine traffic violation. Ms. Williams, Henderson's voice carried the weight of 20 years on the bench. You were observed traveling at significant speed through a residential area. Do you have any explanation for your behavior? His tone suggested he heard every excuse imaginable. Samira's fingers brushed against her helmet's visor. Your Honor, if I may explain the technical aspects of. Ms. Williams, Henderson interrupted, I don't need a technical explanation for straightforward reckless driving. The citation clearly states you were moving at unsafe speeds through a residential zone. The young driver's composed expression never wavered. Years of handling press conferences after intense races had taught her patience. Her attorney, James Chen, stepped forward with a sleek tablet in hand. Your Honor, we have comprehensive data from. Counselor, Henderson cut him off as well. The facts are simple. Your client was observed driving dangerously. This court sees too many young people treating public streets like their personal racetracks. A subtle smile tugged at the corner of Samira's mouth. She stood straighter, her team jacket catching the morning light and highlighting the numerous racing sponsor logos. The pristine helmet beside her bore the unmistakable marks of professional racing, certification stickers, team markings, and her name in bold letters. Your Honor, she began again, her voice carrying the same steady confidence that had guided her through countless interviews. I understand the seriousness of traffic safety. Perhaps if we could present our evidence. Henderson removed his glasses, rubbing his temples. Ms. Williams, this court's time is valuable. The fine is set at $5,000, and I'm mandating a defensive driving course. He paused, looking directly at her. Perhaps this will encourage you to save the speed for more appropriate venues. The gallery stirred as someone in the back row whispered something about Formula One to their neighbor. Samira remained perfectly still, her expression professional and composed. She'd faced tougher critics in post-race debriefings. James Chen cleared his throat. Your Honor, we would like to present evidence that will completely change your understanding of the events in question. He held up the tablet, its screen displaying complex telemetry data. My client is not just any driver. She is. A young clerk hurried into the courtroom, clutching a magazine. She whispered something urgent to the bailiff, who then approached the bench with the publication. Henderson's eyes flickered between the magazine cover and the woman standing before him. The courtroom fell silent as recognition slowly dawned across the judge's face. The magazine's cover showed Samira Williams in full racing gear, standing next to her Formula One car, with the headline, Rising Star, the new face of racing. Henderson set the magazine down, his earlier certainty visibly shaken. He looked at Samira again, this time seeing not just another traffic offender, but something entirely unexpected. Ms. Williams, he said, his tone markedly different. Perhaps we should review that evidence after all. Samira's subtle smile remained patient and professional. She'd won harder battles on trickier tracks. This was just another chance to show exactly who she was. As Samira waited for her team's lawyer to set up the evidence presentation, her mind drifted to where it all began. The scent of motor oil and rubber from her father's modest garage filled her memories, mixing with the sound of Formula One races playing on their old television set. She was just 6 when her father, Marcus Williams, noticed how she could name every driver on the grid and recite their lap times from memory. He'd watch her eyes light up during each race, her small hands mimicking the steering movements of her heroes. Their weekends were spent watching races together, Marcus explaining the intricacies of racing lines and breakpoints, while she soaked up every word. The turning point came on her 8th birthday. Marcus had been saving for months, picking up extra repair jobs and working late into the night. That morning, he led her to the garage with his hands covering her eyes. When he removed them, there it sat, a used go-kart, its red paint slightly faded, but gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "It's not new," he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. "But it's yours, baby girl. Every champion starts somewhere." Samira remembered those early mornings at the local karting track, arriving before sunrise so she could practice before school. Marcus would stand trackside with a stopwatch, calling out her lap times while she pushed herself to go faster, to be smoother through the corners. Other parents would whisper, some dismissive, others curious, but Marcus never wavered in his support. Her first junior karting victory came at age 12. She qualified 5th, but fought her way through the field, making passes that had the crowd holding their breath. When she took the checkered flag, Marcus was crying behind the pit wall, clutching her spare helmet like a trophy. High school brought new challenges. Samira maintained perfect grades while competing in regional championships. She'd do her calculus homework in the pit lane between qualifying sessions, physics studies during lunch breaks at race weekends. Her teachers didn't understand why she couldn't focus on more realistic goals, but Samira knew her path. The breakthrough came during a rainy national championship race. While other drivers hesitated in the treacherous conditions, Samira danced through the spray, her kart finding grip where others slid. A talent scout from McLaren's Young Driver program was watching that day. Her phone rang that evening. They wanted to discuss her future. Marcus sat beside her during the meeting, squeezing her hand as the McLaren representatives outlined their development program. They spoke about Formula 3, Formula 2, and the long road to Formula 1. When they mentioned a full sponsorship, Marcus had to excuse himself, overwhelming emotion evident in his eyes. The years that followed were a blur of testing sessions, races, and podiums. She progressed through the ranks faster than anyone expected, breaking records and challenging assumptions. Every victory was dedicated to her father, who still woke up early to watch her practice sessions, even if now it was through video feeds from tracks around the world. Now, standing in this courtroom, Samira touched the McLaren logo on her jacket. She'd earned every thread of this uniform, every sponsor's badge, every second of track time. The judges' assumptions were nothing new. She'd faced them at every level of racing, from karting to Formula 1. Her hand rested on her helmet, fingers tracing the words painted on its side. "For you, Dad." Whatever happened next in this courtroom, she knew who she was. She was Samira Williams, Formula 1 driver, and she had nothing to prove. But she would anyway. The evidence presentation was ready. Time to show the judge exactly what professional racing looked like. James Chen connected the tablet to the courtroom's display system, and the large screen flickered to life. The dashboard camera footage began playing, showing a crystal-clear view through the windshield of Samira's personal car, a modified McLaren road vehicle equipped with racing telemetry systems. "Your Honor," Chen began, "what you're about to see is comprehensive data from Ms. Williams' vehicle during the incident in question." The screen split into 4 sections: the front view, telemetry data, GPS mapping, and G-force readings. The footage showed a quiet suburban street at 7:15 a.m. Samira's car moved at precisely the speed limit, the telemetry displaying a steady 25 miles per hour. Suddenly, from a side street, a minivan burst through a stop sign, its driver distracted by something in their lap. The courtroom watched in silence as the events unfolded in split-second precision. The telemetry data exploded into action. Brake pressure, steering angle, traction control, and tire load all responding in perfect harmony. Samira's car pivoted with surgical precision, the G-force meter showing expert weight transfer as she executed a textbook avoidance maneuver. "If I may," a new voice spoke up. Dr. Sarah Chen, a vehicle dynamics expert from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, approached the bench. What we're witnessing here is not reckless driving, but rather an exceptional display of vehicle control that prevented a serious accident. Dr. Chen pointed to the data streams. Notice the brake modulation here. Ms. Williams applied exactly the right pressure to transfer weight to the front wheels without locking them. Her steering input shows perfect counterbalance to prevent oversteer. These are not the actions of someone driving recklessly. These are the reflexes of a professional racing driver. The footage continued, showing how Samira's car settled back into its lane, having avoided the minivan without making contact. The entire sequence had taken less than 3 seconds. The average driver, Dr. Chen explained, would have either collided with the van or lost control trying to avoid it. Ms. Williams' actions prevented both outcomes through skill, not luck. Judge Henderson leaned forward, studying the technical readouts with growing interest. These numbers, he gestured to the screen. What do they represent? Those are G-force readings, Samira spoke up, her voice confident and clear. They show the forces acting on the vehicle during the maneuver. The typical driver might manage 0.5 grams in emergency situations. As you can see, I maintained control through 1.2 grams of lateral force, well within my professional training parameters. The judge removed his glasses, looking at the data with new understanding. The screen now showed a simulation of what would have happened with standard emergency braking. A direct collision seemed unavoidable in that scenario. Ms. Williams, Henderson said slowly, your vehicle systems recorded all of this automatically. Yes, Your Honor, she replied. All Formula One drivers maintain similar systems in their personal vehicles. It's part of our continuous training and safety protocols. Every drive is a chance to improve, even on public roads. James Chen stepped forward again. The police report noted excessive speed, but as the telemetry shows, Ms. Williams never exceeded the posted limit. What appeared to be dangerous driving to the observing officer was, in fact, a masterclass in accident avoidance. The courtroom had grown quiet, all eyes fixed on the technical display. The data told a story not of reckless behavior, but of expertise and precision that had potentially saved lives that morning. Judge Henderson sat back, his earlier certainty completely transformed by the evidence before him. He glanced at his watch. It was time for a recess, and clearly, time for him to reconsider his assumptions. Judge Henderson sat in his chambers during the recess, the morning's racing magazine open on his desk. His fingers traced the cover story. Samira Williams, breaking barriers at 200 mph. His son Jacob had been talking about her all month, excited about the new face of Formula One, but Henderson hadn't made the connection until now. He pulled out his phone, quickly searching her name. The screen filled with headlines. Williams secures podium in Monaco. Historic qualifying run places Williams on front row. McLaren's rising star shatters lap record. Each article painted a picture far different from his initial courtroom assumptions. A knock on his chamber door interrupted his research. His clerk, Emily, entered with a tablet showing live social media updates. The morning's court session had already begun circulating online. "Sir," she said carefully, "there's something you should see." The trending posts showed side-by-side images, Samira in her professional racing suit on the podium, and her standing in his courtroom. The comments ranged from amused to outraged at the misunderstanding. One post from a prominent motorsport journalist had already gathered thousands of shares. F1 driver Samira Williams demonstrates perfect accident avoidance, gets cited for reckless driving instead. Henderson's eyes drifted to the family photo on his desk. His daughter Rebecca, recently accepted into flight school, smiled back at him. He'd supported her pursuit of a traditionally male-dominated field, yet here he was, having jumped to conclusions about another young woman's capabilities. The reality of his bias settled uncomfortably in his stomach. The technical evidence had been irrefutable. Samira's actions that morning hadn't just been legal, they'd been exemplary. Her car's telemetry data showed the kind of precision that only came from thousands of hours of professional training. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Jacob. "Dad, isn't that Samira Williams in your courtroom? She's amazing. Did you know she started racing at 8? Can I come watch?" Henderson checked the time. The recess would end in 5 minutes. He straightened his robes, gathering his thoughts. There was a right way to handle this, and it required more than just dismissing the case. Returning to the courtroom, he noticed details he'd missed earlier. Samira's helmet wasn't just any racing gear. It bore the scuffs and marks of real competition. Her team jacket displayed patches from races around the world. Even her posture spoke of someone accustomed to performing under pressure. The gallery had grown during the recess. Several people held racing magazines or phones displaying Formula One websites. A few wore McLaren team merchandise. His courtroom had inadvertently become a meeting point of law and motorsport. As he took his seat at the bench, Henderson caught sight of a small pin on Samira's collar, a karting achievement award. It reminded him of Rebecca's first pilot's wings, proudly displayed on her uniform. Both symbols represented barriers broken, expectations defied. "Before we continue," Henderson began, his voice carrying new understanding, "I believe this court owes Ms. Williams an apology. It appears I made assumptions that the evidence has thoroughly disproven." Samira's professional demeanor softened slightly, a hint of appreciation crossing her features. She stood with the same poise that had carried her through countless podium ceremonies. "However," he continued, an idea forming, "I believe this situation presents an opportunity. Ms. Williams, would you be willing to share your expertise? There might be something valuable we could all learn about judgment, assumption, and excellence." The courtroom leaned forward, waiting for her response. The morning's conflict had opened an unexpected door to understanding, and Judge Henderson was ready to step through it. Judge Henderson's private chambers felt different now, the formal atmosphere softened by mutual respect. Samira sat across from his desk, her helmet placed carefully on a nearby chair. Afternoon sunlight filtered through Venetian blinds, creating strips of gold across her racing credentials spread on the desk. 20 years on this bench," Henderson began, his tone reflective, "and today might be my most enlightening case." He lifted a photograph from his desk, turning it to show Samira. "This is my daughter, Rebecca. She just started flight school last month." Samira studied the image of a young woman standing proudly beside a training aircraft. "The first time in the cockpit changes everything, doesn't it?" She smiled. "That moment when people stop seeing you as an anomaly and start seeing your skill." Rebecca said something similar after her first solo flight. Henderson nodded. "She told me how her instructor finally stopped calling her young lady and started calling her pilot." He paused, weighing his next words. "I supported her dream completely, yet this morning." "You saw what others often see first," Samira completed his thought. "I understand, Your Honor. Every race weekend, I still get asked if I'm lost on my way to the hospitality suite." Her voice carried no bitterness, only determination. Henderson leaned back, his judicial formality giving way to genuine curiosity. "Tell me about your first race. The real first one, not the professional debut." Samira's eyes lit up. "Local karting track, age 8. My father worked extra shifts for months to buy that kart. I qualified last." She laughed softly. "But by the end of the race, I'd moved up to 3rd. Not because I was naturally talented, but because my father had taught me to study every lap, every corner, like it was the most important thing in the world." "Like Rebecca with her flight manuals," Henderson mused. "She sleeps with them under her pillow." "Exactly," Samira nodded. "Excellence doesn't care about expectations. It only cares about dedication." She gestured to her helmet. "Every scratch on that helmet tells a story of learning, of proving something, not to others, but to myself." Henderson picked up the racing magazine from his desk. "My son Jacob collects these. He has every article about you. Last week, he told me he wanted to become a racing engineer because of your technical feedback to your team." "The telemetry data we showed in court," Samira said. "That's the language of racing. Numbers don't care who you are. They only care about precision, about making the right decision in fractions of a second." The judge stood, walking to his window. "You know, we're not so different in our professions. We both deal with split-second decisions that can have major consequences." He turned back to face her. "Though I suspect I could learn something about checking my assumptions before making those decisions." Samira stood as well, her professional demeanor warming. "Every driver knows the track looks different from each angle. Maybe that's what we all need to remember, to look from multiple perspectives before making our calls." "Ms. Williams," Henderson said, extending his hand, "I believe this morning's misunderstanding could serve a greater purpose. Would you be interested in helping me set up a program? Something that combines your expertise with lessons about judgment and perception." Samira took his hand firmly. "Your Honor, in racing we have a saying. The best line through a corner isn't always the obvious one." She smiled. "I think we might have found an interesting new line here." The afternoon light caught the McLaren logo on her jacket as they began to discuss possibilities. Two professionals from different worlds finding common ground in the pursuit of excellence. The McLaren Technology Center's simulator room hummed with sophisticated equipment. Judge Henderson stood before the wraparound screens, holding a professional racing wheel with the uncertainty of someone facing an entirely new challenge. Samira adjusted the seat position, a slight smile playing at her corners of her lips. "This is where every race weekend begins," she explained, calibrating the settings. "Even Formula One champions spend hours here before touching the actual track." Her fingers danced across the controls with practiced precision. "We'll start with Silverstone. It's a classic circuit." The screens lit up with a virtual rendition of the famous British track. Henderson gripped the wheel tighter, his judicial confidence replaced by nervous anticipation. "I assume we're not starting with race speeds." "First rule of racing," Samira said, standing beside him. "You have to walk the track before you can run it." She pointed to the first corner. "Cops. In a real F1 car, we take this at about 180 miles per hour. Today, let's aim for a modest 60. Henderson pressed the accelerator gently. The simulator's hydraulics came alive, recreating every bump and vibration. "This feels real." Samira completed his thought. "That's the point. Every movement, every decision here translates to the track." She watched his tentative inputs. "You're treating the throttle like a legal document, too cautious. Sometimes you need to trust your instincts." The virtual car crawled through the first sequence of corners. Henderson's knuckles whitened on the wheel as he navigated the unfamiliar territory. "How do you make decisions at real racing speeds?" "The same way you do in court," Samira responded. "Experience, preparation, and trusting your training." She leaned in to adjust his hand position. "But first, you need to understand the basics. Feel how the car responds to your inputs." Lap after lap, Henderson's movements became more fluid. Samira's guidance moved from basic controls to racing lines, braking points, and the delicate balance of speed and control. The judge's expression shifted from concentration to growing understanding. "It's like case law," he muttered during one particularly smooth corner. "Each turn builds on the lessons of the previous one." "Exactly." Samira's eyes lit up. "Now you're getting it. Racing isn't about recklessness. It's about precision and judgment. Just like your courtroom." After an hour, Henderson's lap times had improved significantly. Still nowhere near racing pace, but showing the progress of someone beginning to grasp fundamental concepts. Samira pulled up his telemetry data. "Look at your first lap compared to your last." She pointed to the graphs. "Your inputs are smoother, more confident. You're not just reacting anymore. You're anticipating." Henderson removed his hands from the wheel, flexing his fingers. "I never realized the level of skill involved. The split-second decisions, the constant calculations." He shook his head in amazement. "When I saw you in my courtroom, I thought I was seeing the whole picture. I wasn't even seeing the first corner. Samira powered down the simulator. That's why we start here, in a controlled environment. It's a safe place to challenge assumptions, to learn new perspectives. She gestured to the screens. Every driver, no matter their background, faces the same physics, the same challenges. The track doesn't care about anything except how well you understand its demands. As they stepped away from the simulator, Henderson turned to her. You know, I think every judge should experience this. It's a powerful lesson in not jumping to conclusions. Well, Samira smiled, reaching for her phone. I might have some ideas about that youth program we discussed. Sometimes the best way to break down barriers is to put people in the driver's seat, literally. The simulator room's lights dimmed behind them as they walked out. Two professionals from different worlds, united by a deeper understanding of judgment, skill, and the importance of seeing the whole track ahead. 3 months after the courtroom incident, the parking lot of Riverside County Courthouse had transformed. Two professional racing simulators gleamed under portable awnings, surrounded by eager teenagers in racing suits. Judge Henderson stood at a podium, addressing the first class of the Racing for Justice program. When I first met Ms. Williams, he began, scanning the diverse group of young faces. I made the mistake of seeing only what I expected to see. Today, we're here to change expectations. He gestured to where Samira stood in her McLaren racing gear. Sometimes the best lessons come from unexpected teachers. The program had started small, just an idea born in Henderson's chambers. But when Samira shared their vision with McLaren's management, it exploded into something bigger. The team provided simulators, technical support, and a pathway for promising students to enter their engineering program. Samira stepped forward, her racing suit catching the morning sun. Racing isn't just about driving fast, she explained to the attentive crowd. It's about understanding physics, mathematics, and most importantly, judgment. Every lap teaches us to look beyond our preconceptions. The first student approached the simulator. Sarah Chen, a 16-year-old with dreams of becoming a racing engineer, adjusted her seat with trembling hands. Samira leaned in, pointing out the basic controls, while Henderson watched from nearby. Notice her process, he commented to the waiting students. Just like in law, success comes from careful preparation and attention to detail. His voice carried the wisdom of someone who had learned this lesson personally. Local news cameras captured the moment as Sarah completed her first lap. Her face glowed with achievement as Samira showed her the telemetry data, explaining how she could improve. Other judges from the courthouse had wandered out to watch, their curiosity piqued by the unusual scene. Next month, Henderson announced, we're expanding the program. Every participant will spend time both in the simulator and observing court proceedings. Understanding justice, like understanding racing, requires seeing the whole picture. Between sessions, Samira shared stories from her racing career, emphasizing the importance of persistence and precision. The students hung on every word, seeing in her a symbol of what they could achieve. Henderson noticed how his fellow judges listened to, their own perspectives shifting. A young man raised his hand during the question session. Judge Henderson, how did this program change your view of justice? Henderson paused, considering. The law, like racing, requires us to make split-second decisions based on facts, not assumptions. Ms. Williams taught me that excellence can come from anywhere if we're willing to see it. By late afternoon, the first day was winding down. The students gathered for a group photo, their new racing suits marking them as pioneers of the program. Samira and Henderson stood among them, their unlikely partnership having sparked something transformative. You know, Samira said quietly to Henderson as the cameras flashed, my first race win felt amazing, but this might be even better. Henderson watched as Sarah Chen explained a racing line to one of his colleagues' daughters, her earlier nervousness replaced with confidence. I think we've started something important here, he replied. Something that goes beyond racing or law. As the sun set behind the courthouse, the simulators hummed with activity. New students practiced their lines, while others discussed physics with McLaren engineers. The program had become more than just an apology for a misunderstanding. It had become a bridge between worlds. The local paper's headline the next day captured it perfectly. From courtroom conflict to community change. How a judge's mistake launched a movement. Below the headline, a photo showed Samira and Henderson standing before their eager students, proof that the best victories often come from learning to see things differently. The Monaco Grand Prix glittered under the Mediterranean sun. From his position in the McLaren garage, Judge Henderson watched the pre-race preparations with newfound understanding. 3 months of running the Racing for Justice program had taught him to see the intricate ballet of racing for what it truly was. Samira sat in her car on the starting grid, position second, her best qualifying result yet. Through the team radio, her voice carried the calm confidence that Henderson had first witnessed in his courtroom. The same poise that had turned a traffic citation into a movement for change. Track temperature optimal, her race engineer reported. Remember, just like we practiced in the simulator. Henderson smiled, knowing that 12 students from their program had helped analyze the practice data, their mathematical skills growing alongside their understanding of racing. The 5 red lights illuminated one by one. Henderson held his breath, along with the 250,000 spectators lining the streets of Monaco. This was more than a race now. It was a testament to looking beyond first impressions. The lights went out. Samira's start was perfect, her reactions honed by thousands of hours of practice. She slipped past the pole position car before the first corner, taking the lead with surgical precision. The Monaco crowd roared its approval. Textbook start, Henderson whispered, recognizing the same controlled excellence he'd seen in her accident avoidance months ago. On the pit wall, Sarah Chen, now an intern with McLaren's engineering team, monitored the telemetry with professional focus. Lap after lap, Samira extended her lead. Her racing line through the famous Casino Square was a masterclass in precision, each apex hit with mathematical accuracy. The commentators praised her technique, unaware of how she'd used the same skills to prevent an accident on a suburban street. With 10 laps remaining, rain began to fall on the Principality. Other drivers pitted for wet tires, but Samira's voice came clear over the radio. Track grip optimal for current setup. Let's make history. Henderson watched her navigate the slick streets, remembering her words from their first real conversation. Excellence doesn't care about expectations. The rain intensified, but her lap times remained consistent, her control absolute. As she entered the final lap, the garage fell silent. Sarah Chen gripped her tablet tighter, her internship badge gleaming under the garage lights. Through the spray and the pressure, Samira maintained her line, carrying the hopes of dreamers around the world. The tunnel echoed with the sound of her engine. Through the swimming pool complex, past the chicane, and finally, the checkered flag waved. Samira Williams had won the Monaco Grand Prix. The team erupted in celebration. Henderson found himself embracing Sarah Chen, both of them caught up in the moment's significance. On the cool-down lap, Samira's voice crackled through the speakers. This one's for everyone who ever faced judgment. Keep pushing, keep proving. At the podium ceremony, she stood highest, the Princess of Monaco presenting her trophy. But it was what happened next that captured headlines worldwide. Samira gestured to the side of the podium, where Henderson and several students from their program stood waiting. "These are my special guests," she announced to the global audience. "They represent a program that's changing lives by teaching us all to look beyond our assumptions." The cameras focused on the diverse group of young faces, each wearing a Racing for Justice shirt. Later, in the evening light of Monaco Harbor, Samira placed her trophy in Henderson's hands. "From traffic citation to this," she smiled. "Sometimes the best victories come from our biggest challenges." Henderson nodded, watching the sunset paint the water gold. "In the end," he replied, "justice, like racing, is about seeing the truth clearly, even if it challenges everything we thought we knew." The trophy gleamed between them, a symbol not just of racing excellence, but of the power of looking past first impressions to see the champion within.